In 336 BCE, Alexander the Great was born, destined to change the course of history through conquest. But that same year, another man was born, not a warrior, but a thinker who had shaped the minds of great individuals, including a Roman emperor some 500 years later. His name was Zeno, the founder of Stoicism. Zeno was born in Citium, a Greek city on the island of Cyprus, where many Phoenicians had settled. For this reason, it is unknown whether Zeno was of Greek or Phoenician heritage. What is known is that his father was a merchant and that Zeno followed in his footsteps. Despite the need to barter as a merchant, Zeno was not social. He preferred to eat alone, frequently turning down dinner invitations. However, fate had a different path in store for him. One fateful day, Zeno set sail from Phoenicia to Piresius, his ship loaded with valuable cargo. Then, disaster struck. Whether it was a violent storm or some other misfortune, his ship was wrecked, and his fortune was lost beneath the waves. With nothing left, Zeno made his way to Athens, a city renowned for philosophy. There, he wandered into a bookstore and picked up Xenophon's Memorabilia, a book about Socrates. Intrigued, he asked the bookseller where he could find a man like Socrates. Just as he asked, a philosopher named Crates walked by. The bookseller pointed and said, "Follow yonder man." Perhaps it was his near-death experience or his loss of wealth, but something caused Zeno to not only introduce himself to Crates, but also to become his pupil. Later reflecting on the past, Zeno remarked, "I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered shipwreck." Like many ancient stories, Zeno's path to philosophy is disputed. Some say he was not aboard the ship when it sank, but rather already in Athens when he received the news of his financial ruin. Upon hearing it, he supposedly said, "It is well done of thee, fortune, thus to drive me to philosophy." Others believe there was no shipwreck at all. Instead, they claim that Zeno simply lost interest in trade and, captivated by Athens' intellectual energy, sold his goods and chose philosophy willingly. Regardless of the truth, one fact remains. Zeno did become Crates' pupil in some manner, and he dedicated himself fully to the pursuit of wisdom. One would expect Zeno to have adopted Crates' philosophy of cynicism. However, Zeno was not a cynic, and he chose to listen to philosophers from vastly different schools of thought. Over the next 10 years, he studied under the philosophers Stilpo, who emphasized virtue's value to the soul, and Xenocrates, who was the head of Plato's academy at the time. He also consulted the Oracle of Delphi, asking how to live a good life. The oracle's cryptic answer was, "Take on the complexion of the dead." Zeno interpreted this as a call to study the writings of past philosophers, and so he did, devouring every text he could find. After years of study, Zeno began teaching in the heart of Athens, pacing up and down the Stoic Palika, also known as the Painted Porch. This public space was the perfect place. It was located near the center of the city, and it displayed the wealth that Athens gained through conquest, making it a crowded area where many would hear him. In no time, Zeno built up a large following. His followers were first called Zenonians, but over time they became known as Stoics, after the Stoa Palika, where he taught. He taught them to the end of his days. Despite being on friendly terms with them, he kept his sayings short and was easily angered by those he called chatterboxes. Once, he told one of these individuals, "The reason why we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth is that we may listen the more and talk the less." Thus, being a public figure and leader made him no more social than he was in his youth. His relaxed behavior when drunk shocked his followers, as they could never believe that a man's personality could change so greatly. Throughout his time teaching, Zeno lived a simple life, wearing basic thin garments and eating simple food. Instead of buying his own place of residence, Zeno chose to be a guest in another philosopher's house. He would discourse with many philosophers, and notably, despite his unsocial personality, he developed a friendship with King Antigonus of Macedon, who enjoyed hearing the philosopher's wisdom. Zeno's teachings were built on virtue, likely due to his association with Stilpo, and irrationality, likely from Xenocrates' Platonic philosophy. Zeno believed that virtue, not pleasure, was the highest good, and that the world operated according to a rational order. As he famously said, man conquers the world by conquering himself. His philosophy stood in stark contrast to Epicureanism, another popular school of thought, which claimed that the world was chaotic and that pleasure was the key to happiness. Zeno gained immense respect in Athens. The city awarded him keys to the city, a golden crown, and a bronze statue. He was even given a tomb in Athens, a high honor for a philosopher, given the city's rich philosophical history. When Zeno was an old man, King Antigonus of Macedon invited him to teach not only himself, but all of Macedon. But Zeno declined, saying he was too old to travel. Instead, he sent two of his brightest students to teach in his place. Zeno's age at the time of his death is uncertain, though three possible ages have been put forward: 98, 80, and 72. There are two accounts regarding the manner of Zeno's death which have come down to historians. One is certainly a myth, and the other is possible, but unlikely. The myth goes as follows. While walking, Zeno stubbed his toe so hard it broke. He then had an epiphany. He realized he had lived a satisfying life and decided that now was a good time to end it. Then, he stopped breathing until he died. This account is a myth because it is not possible to hold one's breath until death. Perhaps Zeno strangled himself in some way, but witnesses changed the story to make it less disturbing. In the slightly more probable account, Zeno had the epiphany without breaking his toe, and then proceeded to not eat until he starved to death. Despite the questionable nature of these accounts, they emphasize Zeno's dedication to following what is natural, a key Stoic belief. In this case, instead of resisting the inevitability of death when one is old, he voluntarily accepts it. Zeno's ideas did not die with him, even though none of his works survive today, for others continued his school of thought. Significantly, years later, his philosophy flourished in Rome, inspiring remarkable figures to further develop it. These include Epictetus, a man with an exceptional drive to persevere despite being enslaved; Seneca, a statesman and playwright; Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor whose meditations reveal how Stoic philosophy shaped the worldview of the world's most powerful man. Zeno began his journey as a wealthy merchant. A shipwreck took away his fortune, but gave him wisdom. From the ruins of his old life, he built a new path. Though Zeno brought no kingdoms to heal, his legacy is perhaps greater than conquerors, for his philosophy has shaped countless minds from his time to ours thousands of years later.